and welcome to yet another episode of Conversations in the Future of Work, where we welcome on specialists across a variety of different fields and spaces and areas to discuss their thoughts and their views on trends we're seeing in our somewhat chaotic world of work these days. In this episode, I am thrilled to welcome on Skyler Place, who has a very specific area of expertise, which is, of course, near and dear to my heart, being a nonverbal communication expert. So without further ado, Skyler Place, over to you.
Hey, Rachel, pleasure.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. So just for the audience, give us a tight overview of your bio.
Sure. So I've spent most of my career working at the intersection of psychology and technology. So how can we use tools like artificial intelligence to improve the human condition and to help people communicate better, control their health better, and interact with their peers in a more effective way? And I've built a couple different technology companies that really leverage the power of the voice. So what can we understand from how people communicate, from settings ranging from veteran mental health all the way to customer support in enterprise business.
Awesome. I'm thrilled to have you on.
Thank you.
So jumping right in, I'd love to hear a little bit more about, because I mean, of course, you did your PhD in a very interesting space, and then the world has evolved in a very interesting way. So what's like most surprised you about the application of your PhD in?
So my undergrad was in computer science and my PhD is in cognitive psychology, really focused on quantitative modeling. So how can we, leverage what has become artificial intelligence to understand human psychology, human intentionality? And what was interesting, so I graduated almost 15 years ago with my PhD. And in I would say the first 10 years, the focus and the skill set that was most relevant was really on the data science skills. Mm-hmm. So a lot of folks with quantitative PhDs were being hired into tech companies and leading data science efforts, leading quantitative research efforts. And what's been really surprising for me in the last couple of years, really since the whole explosion of generative AI, is when I'm talking to CEOs and advising organizations on how to think about their AI strategy, mm-hmm. the philosophy of AI has become the focus point of many of their questions. So things like, what are the unique skill sets that humans have that I don't want AI to be replacing? How can I leverage the strengths in creativity and critical thinking that humans outperform computers in, and combine that with some of the generative AI technologies to coach people to be even better. So it's been really interesting that, my background in understanding philosophy of mind and sort of human intentionality more on the psychology and philosophy side, I've been leveraging a lot more recently than the kind of quantitative mathematics that was the foundation of a lot of the modeling and machine learning work that I did earlier in my career.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's like, now that the technology is really here knocking at our doors, these more nebulous questions around like the interaction between AI and human minds, right, is at the forefront.
Absolutely. Yeah, because you're seeing folks are pausing, which I love. They're pausing and thinking and saying, I don't just want to replace my workforce. I have some amazing employees who have some unbelievable skill sets and experiences. How do I leverage that? How do I leverage our unique abilities as humans and help people excel even more with some additional tools?
Totally. Absolutely. And so on that note of how to leverage AI to amplify and help people improve, as you mentioned, what are your thoughts on AI's actual ability to provide meaningful feedback on like human behaviors? And I say in real time, it doesn't have to be in real time, but I know that that's part of your background as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been working in the space for 15 plus years now, and there's been solutions that can understand human behavior from an AI perspective, if you will, for at least the last 15 years. And there's been academic research going on for a long time before that. And the real-time component is an interesting part because I think the caveat with real-time is that it is very computationally expensive.
Yeah.
So when you think about providing feedback in real time, it's on average, 10 times more expensive than providing feedback with a delay. So you have to, as a business leader, really think about, what are the use cases where real time gives an unbelievable advantage for your product and for your users, because you're going to have to be charging a lot more in order to have a profitability with a real time solution with today's technology. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, so is that mostly because of like the server side processing cost and how quickly you kind of have to get things from one end to one end processed, analyzed, and then like regurgitated back to the user in real time?
Exactly. Yeah. So it depends a lot on your stack, if you will, your technical stack. So if you can do the processing at the end user device on a phone, for example, there's ways to make it less expensive. But in a traditional big enterprise approach of you are streaming data from a data center to the cloud, processing, sending it back down to end users who often are on thin clients in corporate environments that don't have local compute capabilities,
Right.
then that's where things get very, very expensive in an enterprise setting. But what's interesting is, despite all of that, the accuracy, the impact of these solutions on a whole variety of measures of human behavior are pretty accurate and pretty accurate to a point of being useful and predictive, right? So there's a whole variety of use cases where AI has been wonderfully efficient and effective long before the sort of generative AI revolution, which I think has actually impacted a lot more of the quote unquote verbal aspect of the conversation than the nonverbal. So the ability to understand the words in the conversation has improved greatly with some of these new technologies, but the nonverbal aspect has been leveraging a different approach from a technical perspective that's been pretty powerful for at least the last 10 years.
Totally. Yeah. And by nonverbal, are you talking more about like the vocal components of speech, or are you also talking about like body language and those behaviors?
Yeah, all of it. So eye contact, head motion, leaning, nodding, tone of voice, intonation, speaking rate, everything except for the meaning of the words, if you will.
Right. Yep. Yep. Totally. It's so interesting because obviously that's been our big focus at Virtual Sapiens since we started, and the generative AI revolution, I like that you called it that, was so interesting because all of a sudden it became table stakes to have the words also be analyzed, because it also was just like so easy now through APIs to like loop these things in. But the nonverbal behavioral stuff's been a lot more interesting, I think, at least for us, to explore, because we do leverage actually on client, on device compute power. And so the real-time component for us has been like, it hasn't immediately broken the bank. Like, we haven't had to raise tens of millions of dollars just to get out the door, which has been great. But it's just fascinating to see things continue to evolve in this space.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's become interesting because you now have the optionality as a product designer to decide which stream of information you want to access, right?
Yeah.
And especially, in near real time, you can now get the words in the conversation with low latency along with the nonverbals. So you get to decide which of these information streams are most valuable for the use cases that you're supporting. And that's a big change from how things were a couple of years ago. Yeah,
right. Definitely. And what are your thoughts on, because, there's the application of using this technology as a coach, right? To receive feedback on yourself. And then there's the kind of everyone's infatuation with being able to like read the room and decode people's, because you said something earlier that I think is really interesting and important. And it's that there's a difference a little bit between someone's intended message or their like the intention behind their communication, and then how they actually come across, right? Like, that's
absolutely
always at the root of all of it. So if you're using AI in real time on a video call, for example, to deduce what other people might be thinking or feeling, but it's not like, how do you reconcile that with the fact that like you can't know their intention?
Yeah. Yeah. And it gets even more, there's another layer of complication with this because there's the goals of the individual in the conversation, right? So
Yeah.
it's like I have a worldview of how I'm thinking, I have a worldview of how I'm presenting myself, I have a perspective on how you're receiving this conversation, and then I have a goal in mind of what I'm trying to communicate, right?
Right.
And what's really interesting when you think about an AI coach is which of those sort of personas are you coaching on, right?
Yeah.
And what are you training the AI on in terms of the truth? Because
Yeah.
the quote unquote facts of a conversation may be totally irrelevant to the perception of how things are going, right? And if the person on the other side of the conversation perceives the conversation is going really well, it doesn't actually matter if you think you're stumbling through everything, right?
Yeah.
So in some sense, like what's best for an AI coach? Is it
Yeah.
the facts of your speaking rate is higher than ideal in a conversation like this? You're coming across as nervous. Or is it your body language is presenting in such a way that you come across as confident, and that is a stronger signal than your speaking rate being too quickly of being nervous, and therefore the person on the other end is actually receiving this as an expert who knows what they're talking about, right?
Right.
And in which of those sort of aspects of a conversation
Yeah.
should an AI coach be focused on? And that's the really interesting part of inserting another entity into a conversation.
Yeah.
When humans are used to human interactions, right? And do you build an AI that
Yeah.
is that interacts with you in a way a human does, or do you purposely build an AI that is focused on other aspects of the conversation that a human isn't as aware of as the conversation is happening?
Right.
Um,
Totally.
does that make sense? Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, and because we've had to put a lot of thought into this, obviously, at Virtual Sapiens
Mhm.
too. And like our view on it is if our AI can be a mirror that we hold up to say, like, these were the behaviors you exhibited on the call.
Mhm.
We like to leave it up to the user um, to integrate and to reflect on the feedback that they've received and whether or not it aligns with those goals and those intentions. Right?
Mhm.
Like here's the way you're showing up. Here are some of the perception-based like communication trends that those might affect. Like, is that what you were going for? Because if it wasn't, then then you can start to maybe think about changing certain behaviors in certain contexts. And then the other piece that we do is we really do encourage a human coach to be in the loop so
Mhm.
that the human coach can help with some of that like synthesis, right?
Yep,
Uh,
absolutely. Yeah, it's been interesting to see sort of the branding and product development in the space in the last couple of years because a lot of the companies in the early days, quote unquote, were branding this type of approach as emotion AI, and it was about recognizing the emotions that humans were presenting in a conversation. And I'm a big fan of the fact that the industry has moved towards understanding human behavior, right? And it's
yeah.
much more about what is happening in the interaction, what are the behaviors, and leaving the human to be the expert to decide what are the emotions that I am trying to express or that I'm feeling within this interaction.
I'm so glad you brought that up because that's been such a big evolution for us as well. Like from the beginning, I was very reticent to use any of the AI that had already been developed in terms of like, oh, detecting emotions and like
Mhm.
this is the expression you're making, blah, blah, blah. Because I was like, there's such a difference, there's such a leap for the expressed emotion or the emotion detected, for lack of a better
Mhm.
term, and then the felt sense of emotion,
Exactly.
right?
Yep.
And I was like, the last thing we're gonna do also is tell someone like that they should be smiling more or
Right.
and so we don't reflect back any emotions. We just we'll give you like a facial expression variation
Mhm.
reading, and so you can see, oh, my facial expressions varying a lot in this part of the conversation, and then it went completely flat or
Mhm.
neutral or stayed happy, or it's up to you to develop that awareness, but we can reflect back on the variation, just not on the emotion.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it gets back to that question of, what are the strengths that the human is bringing to the conversation, and how do you leverage those as a AI tool builder,
Right.
so that you're not distracting folks with misinformation relating to how they're quote unquote supposed to be feeling, which may not be actionable or particularly useful in the moment, right?
Totally. Oh man, I could keep. I'll go to the next question, but I could talk to you about this all day. So, in terms of these applications of AI, like, what are you most excited about in terms of the continued evolution moving forward?
Yeah, so I think what I'm excited about broadly is the availability of AI coaches for pretty much every role in the workplace, particularly in tech companies, but across a much broader set of industries as well. And I think the OpenAI, ChatGPT, the attention they've received has made this approach much more of the awareness in the common non-expert, if you will, has increased dramatically. So folks are asking the question, how can this help me with my job? How can this make my life at home more efficient and more effective? And I think that we're seeing a little bit more openness to folks who may think that their skill set is too specialized or too experience driven to have a tool that could help them. And I think everyone from the CEO, down to the intern is thinking, how can I do my job more effectively, more efficiently, and leverage some of these new technologies. So I think the idea of an AI coach for every knowledge worker is a reality that's in front of us, and how to ethically and appropriately implement those approaches are where, as a consultant, I spend a lot of my time working with organizations, helping answer some of those questions.
Yeah. What has been the most surprising role that AI has been able to help coach that you've seen?
Yeah, so I think the ones that I'm least knowledgeable about and therefore most surprised at has been in the design space. So thinking about UX, UI, graphic designers, Adobe and some other organizations have really come out with a next generation set of tools to help support the creative professions. And that's a market where there's in particular a little bit of, in my experience, hesitancy of, does my unique skill set as a designer going to be replaced? And this idea of augmenting instead of replacing. There's been some really great conversations I've been having with folks on how to leverage these tools to make your client, be able to do better work for your clients, not just faster work. Right. And that's been a really interesting evolution of how some of these creative roles are thinking about using tools to augment their abilities. So
right. Yeah, we just moved. My husband and I and our son just moved, and we have a gallery wall of art. And my husband was trying to find a program that could help him within like the AI space of like combining virtual reality or it's like AR and then getting it was so funny trying to get the AI to give us different dimensions and different designs of where we could put our pictures on this wall. And it really was not, it was really having a hard time. So I don't know if maybe there's like, it's still a lot more work within the actual like physical design space.
Right.
Still.
Yeah. No, I mean, as you know, the technology is changing day by day, week by week. So I was talking to a few friends who are in the interior design business and trying to figure out if there are tools that allow them to do, better visualization of furniture and spaces, which I think is relevant, relative to what you were just describing. And they haven't, there's no silver bullet yet, I think, for that. But I think it's an area where there's been rapid improvement in the last, days, weeks, months. Every time I talk about this, I have to, reacquaint myself with the state of the art because it's changing so quickly.
Totally. And you've mentioned a few things in this regard. What are you most concerned about as we continue to push the boundaries in this space?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned earlier one of the things that I was really excited about was that business leaders were pausing and asking the question of what's the appropriate use case. And I think that on the flip side is also, I think the biggest concern is there's a lot of attitudes in tech about, just try it, break stuff, let's see what happens, and pick up the pieces and move forward. But keeping the pace of innovation very quick. And I think when we're talking about tools that are changing how people's jobs are being done, how people's performance in their jobs are being measured, when the actual human experience of work is changing so dramatically, we really have to think deeply about the appropriate use cases of these technologies. And I think today, the ability to coach and expert is a great use case for some of these generative AI approaches. So as long as you know enough about the topic area, the hallucinations, the fallacies, the misinformation, you as a human can weed out the truth from the misinformation. But if you blindly start applying these solutions to replace human decision making or to replace critical entire roles, they aren't ready for it, right? And you're going to run into many problems across the spectrum. I mean, I think we've all seen the news, the kind of the joke of the week around Google recommending adding glue to your pizza recipes.
Yeah, right.
But imagine that as it relates to performance reviews of marginalized populations, right? Like the information that's being fed into these is a representation of everything we've ever written or consumed on the internet. And as we all know, the internet is not always right on every topic, right?
Yeah.
So that's I think the ethics around this, the boundaries of use cases, having business leaders really stop and think and bring their employees into the conversation. And really think of the use of AI in the same way you would evaluate new product features for your users. So, doing user research, talking with your employees, really understanding what is helping, what is hurting, and what enables them to be successful, as compared to looking to the top line and say, oh, if I bring on board an AI coach, I can reduce my cost by 10%, and that's my only definition of success. The human element of this, I think, remains absolutely critical.
Totally. One of the things that I've liked to think could come from this like rapid adoption of AI is a little bit of that pause and thinking critically about the information that we're being given. And I think that goes for anything that we may ask of and receive from an AI bot or assistant, but then also like reading the news. Like there's the misinformation, that has been around for like many years is just not a new thing, right? But maybe now we've come to see just how powerful that the access to information that might not be fully accurate is, and maybe as a people we can really start to develop more of that, those critical thinking skills.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's even more important relative to the nonverbal AI solutions. So if you think about, what we were talking about in terms of measuring behavior versus measuring emotion or intentionality, if you can imagine, flash forward 5 years and, part of your performance review is the body language that as a sales leader, you exhibit in front of clients, right?
Yeah.
And you're being evaluated on your communication style automatically by an AI solution that the sales leader has brought in because they think that getting everyone to behave the same way in front of the clients will lead to a more consistent selling motions and higher sales rates, right? But when you have, and if your behavior changes, the question is why, right? And is that because of things happening in your personal life? Is that because of the previous conversation you had? What part of that is ethically appropriate for your company to be aware of or to be evaluating? And when you start moving from using these tools to help the employee to using them to blindly evaluate the employee, that's this really dangerous line, I think. And it's particularly so within the nonverbal space.
Totally.
Because of this divide between observed behavior and hidden intentionality.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's one other thing I was going to say about that, man, just escaped me. But I think the making sure that that's what it was, that there's not too much of a prescriptive nature either to the feedback, I think is a delicate balance, because you don't want everyone to be getting the impression that, like you said, we want cookie cutter people with cookie cutter behaviors. Right. So it's so fascinating though, like the level of nuance and thought that has to go into any kind of application of AI in this space. But just to know that it's possible is exciting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there are companies today that are selling solutions that, if you follow this script, you will sell more because this script is what the top selling individuals in your organization are doing. And yes, on average, you look across a big data set, the statistics are true, but the ability of an individual to understand in the moment what is the right response and right way to deliver that response is a decision tree that has many branches, right?
Yeah.
So there is no one right answer in the moment. And I think that once again, we get into how does an AI help coach versus what are the strengths of a human in the interaction, and that ability in the moment to know, what is the right next step to move the conversation forward.
Mhm.
I think is something we want to preserve and coach on, not try to
Yeah.
average out across everyone.
Totally. Absolutely. Well, Skyler, thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
taking the time to show up and to share so much of your thought in this space. To many people, it feels like AI has only just now come onto the scene, but as you know, that's not the case. So, anything else you'd like to share with our audience?
No, I think it's an exciting time. AI has gone from niche use cases to something that we all, I think, are thinking about on the daily. And I would just say, continue to think and continue to make good decisions for you and your organization. And there are experts out there to help if you need help.
Awesome. And to that point, how can people reach out to you? What's the best way?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, just Skyler Place on LinkedIn. I run Skyler Place Consulting, and I work with organizations of all sizes to help them figure out how to take advantage of some of these modern AI tools to help move their business and their employees into a better position.
Awesome. Great. Thank you again. And thanks, of course, to everyone for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Wonderful. Thanks, Rachel.